When we think about games from the Fallout saga, we immediately remember all the positive moments and the bad ones, like feeling angry about some bugs. But in my case, I remember mainly the notable factions that we can join or not, such as the New California Republic, Kaiser's Legion, the Great Khans, Brotherhood of Steel, and the Institute, among many others. But when we think about villains, the first thing that comes to my head is the Enclave, a faction that has an impressive visual appeal and attitude, and has a strong presence wherever they go. They arrive with their high technology and imposing armor and take what they want, causing chaos wherever they go. But as times and games went by, the Enclave ended up falling behind in terms of size, importance, and appeal to the public. In this video, I will explain what happened to the Enclave and why they were practically forgotten in the modern Fallout universe. Before I start talking about what went wrong with the Enclave and why they were massacred both in terms of gameplay and in terms of narrative and story, I'm going to talk briefly about the beginning of the Enclave and what will lead to its fall. The Enclave has a long history in the Fallout universe that begins before the Great War. Members of the government, scientists, and high-ranking members of society, such as executives, decided to form the Provisional Government to restore the United States after a nuclear war, a faction that would become known as the Enclave. They had several bases spread across the territory of the United States, some manned and others empty as an escape measure in case any main base was destroyed. The members of the Enclave were divided into several regions, but their main base was the Pacific Oil Platform located near the state of California. This platform, after the Great War, would be used by the members of the Enclave as the main command point for their other bases in the United States. The platform would become known as Enclave Control Station. During and after the Great War, tragedy struck the Enclave, which lost the vast majority of lines of communication with its other bases in the United States, which left 10 and their bases in the dark, similar to what happened to Vault-Tec and its vaults. Shortly before and after the Great War, members of the Enclave would kill government survivors who were not part of their independent group, whether they were opposed to the Enclave or not, simply without any chance of explanation or of converting. Anyone who did not do or had business with the Enclave were killed. After these events, the Enclave would become increasingly radical with the racist and supremacist ideas of its faction, which said that all humans who were not pure should be exterminated. After some time, the faction's vision would become even more extremist because even humans who were not irradiated from some vaults were executed with no chance of defense, which would elevate the Enclave to one of the most extremist and supremacist groups in the wasteland. Even with all the preparation and planning, the Enclave would remain in isolation for a long time, and only in 2140 would they take their extremism to the limit, deciding that all irradiated and non-pure beings in their vision should be exterminated. During its time in isolation, the Enclave would carry out several projects to raise the technology of its faction to the limit and improve the command platform as much as possible. This meant that in 2236, when they broke the isolation, the Enclave was the most technological faction in the entire wasteland, and probably from all over the world. They would begin to carry out several exploration missions in the state of California until they found an old military base that was carrying out experiments with the FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, a base that was occupied by the victims of the virus, the super mutants. Fighting their way through the base and suffering several casualties, the Enclave obtained a vial with an intact sample of the virus. This sample would be used for further experimentation, to try to create new creatures to be used as a weapon and to carry out a much more sinister experiment. A new virus that would be spread through the air and would exterminate all beings affected by radiation. Until that point, the Enclave was practically unstoppable. Fast airborne teams with new heavy and technologically cutting-edge armor, in addition to all the offensive weaponry, training, and discipline. What the Enclave wanted, they got, but they didn't have something very important: numbers. The Enclave was isolated and its population small, and because of their extremism, they did not accept members from outside their faction, which resulted in, no matter how well organized and equipped they are, losing lives in battle was very costly for the Enclave. When the Enclave eliminated 100 enemies, 100 more appeared in their place, but if the Enclave lost 10 soldiers, they would not be able to replace them. This left them with their hands tied and in a complicated situation, too stretched with their capabilities, which made the Enclave's plan, Virus, increasingly important, because if they were the only ones, their limited numbers would no longer matter. In 2242, the tests were completed and the toxin was made with a 99.5% of success. 250,000 gallons had been produced in just hours from its release. In a great effort, the Chosen One managed to infiltrate and kill the president of the Enclave, Frank Horrigan, who was an elite super mutant soldier, and activated a nuclear warhead in the base, destroying it and avoiding global annihilation. Here, we already encountered some narrative problems. No matter how extended the Enclave was, a person infiltrating a military base without anyone detecting or stopping him for checking is quite ridiculous, in my opinion, and then ending up with elite soldiers and a president who should be extremely protected. And even worse, not only that, the protagonist destroys the entire base. These problems, in my opinion, are very complicated, but I believe that they were ignored by the public due to the rest of the story, and even this ending being well written, despite the very large main protagonist vibe. For the rest, the writing of Fallout 2 is very constant. There are justifications and a lot of struggle to defeat the Enclave on land, causing two extremely hostile factions, the New California Republic and Brotherhood of Steel, to ally to end them, and it was still very complicated. And even after the destruction of the platform, the Enclave still regrouped on land and resisted, but in the very end, they were defeated by the New California Republic. The entire narrative is well explained, and the fight is very fierce and disputed. No victory was easy, until the events of Fallout 3, and that's when the things start to go wrong. In late 2242, the Enclave survivors regrouped at the Navarro military base under the command of Sergeant Granite. At about this time, President John Henry Eden contacted the chief scientist Alton Sr. and ordered that most of the soldiers in the west be relocated east to Raven Rock, near the former capital of the United States. In 2246, Navarro still maintained a military base fully populated by the Enclave, but in that same year, the main resistance force of the Enclave, led by Sergeant Granite, was destroyed by the NCR. The commander's whereabouts are unknown, and the remaining soldiers abandoned the base and left. Some would try to integrate themselves as inhabitants of the NCR, but many were caught and suffered punishments, be it imprisonment or death. Few went to the north, where the majority would end up dying, and the rest would go east. Some would manage to reach Raven Rock, and a few others would reach an Enclave base near the city of Chicago, but this has not been confirmed. One way or another, the Navarro base would mark the Enclave's last attempt at organized resistance on the West Coast. Upon arriving at Raven Rock Base, the Enclave survivors found an extremely technological and very well equipped base with research and equipment production sections that would be essential for the war effort. The remnants were welcomed with open arms by President John Henry Eden, which launched several iBots into the wasteland with advertisements announcing the new army and the return of old America. The prospect of a new, untouched base and a new future for the Enclave excited its members, who began new scientific projects and turned to the production of new equipment for their campaigns, in addition to, of course, an entire unused military stockpile that was stored at the base. In 2276, aiming to expand its presence in the wasteland capital, the Enclave would invade the almost completed Purity Project, which would greatly increase the Enclave's power by having access to purified water either for its own faction or to gain the favor of the local population. The Enclave would invade and quickly take over the project for themselves, since it was not being protected by any military force or mercenaries, and the plan was almost a complete success if it were not for the courage of the project's lead scientist, who would sacrifice himself by activating the project prematurely, sealing it, and flooding the place with radiation, killing everyone inside, or almost everyone. And that, in my opinion, is the first big narrative error of Fallout 3 main history, because why you, a very trained, let's say intelligent and disciplined Enclave officer, would doubt the experienced scientist lead project of the Project Purity that the project isn't complete. He said it isn't complete, the Enclave officer didn't believe it, and then he said again it isn't complete, because if it was, it would probably already been activated and the water would be already being distributed to the populace. But no, the Enclave officer for some reason thinks that the lead scientist would be hiding the completion of the project. To what reason? Well, I don't know, and probably the Bethesda writers doesn't know as well. So he asks to the lead scientist to activate anyway, and this is when the father kills himself to save the project, let's say like that, from being captured and activated, even if it was not, well, ready to the hands of the Enclave, let's say like that. So everyone dies of extremely radiation, but not the soldier of the Enclave, not the commander of the Enclave. Why is that? Because he took some medicine pill that make him resist the radiation, but for how much time? Because it was so big of a radiation that other people that entered the room died. Like when you are captured and you give the password to the Enclave, the wrong password, a soldier enters and he puts the wrong password and dies after. So someone entered the capsule of the project and saved Altum, bring him out, and didn't have any effects. What medicine is this? Is a new experimental Enclave medicine, very efficient against rats, because Radaway doesn't stop the radiation to kill the player inside that cupola. So for me, it's a narrative error. Like Autumn, even with the medicine, the product, he couldn't survive that giant amount of radiation. But let's think that it was a miracle experimental medicine and he survived it because of that. Now let's continue. The protagonist would manage to escape from the Enclave soldiers and join up with the Brotherhood of Steel, and then continue his mission to get the last piece to activate the Purity Project. And for some reason, the Enclave follow the protagonist, I don't know, a spy inside Brotherhood base maybe, and they know everything that the protagonist is doing. And of course, Brotherhood of Steel, dumb as hell, would not protect the protagonist on a very important mission to recover a piece that would complete the Project Purity, that would give practically infinite water, clean water, in a very radioactive wasteland. So now, no protection in this important mission. And Enclave knows it all in some way, maybe some, I don't know, spy device that give all the information of what the player could do, because yeah, the player could go on an important mission, but the player could go, don't know, visit his father's grave or something like that, something not important, and then Enclave would lose time, but they know all the informations. And of course, the convenience of the entrance of the vault, because the player has to go to an alternative path to get into the vault, but not the Enclave, because the children didn't let anyone that they didn't trust into the vault. So we have two options here. One, we know that isn't true. The Enclave didn't follow us through the little lamplight path, because the children would probably be all dead and the place all destroyed by Enclave soldiers. So we are up with two options for the Enclave. That would be the main entrance, but we know the main entrance is very, very, very radioactive, to a point that not Red X and not other head medicine in lore, let's say like that, would allow a normal person to go, even with the power armor. So no, a normal person could pass for the entrance of the vault, which left us another option. Maybe they had a giant drill and they get it on the top of the position in the vault and drill all the way down and blow up the up part of the vault corridors, and then they entered by the giant hole that the giant Enclave drill made. I'm just kidding, but well, it's Bethesda, it's an option. It's just another narrative error, this part of the game, in my opinion. But let's continue. So all that movement results in the protagonist's success in finding what was missing, and that was another success for the Enclave that would trap the protagonist in a vault and capture the Gek, that was the part that was missing, and the player. With a solid base in Raven Rock, with equipment production and scientific experiments, and now with the capture of the Project Purity, everything seemed great for the Enclave. They had a strong position in the wasteland, they were spreading their propaganda of a new United States everywhere, and their army has never been better equipped and trained, until boom, Bethesda magic. In my opinion, this moment of the Enclave's power and capture of the player could be a moment of choice for him, because at this moment the Enclave has everything except the password to activate the project, so Colonel Autumn tries to get the password from the protagonist. Here we could have the choice of, if we refuse to hand over the password, the game would continue in the same way, but if we handed over the password, perhaps we could be recruited and join the Enclave. However, for Bethesda, it is impossible for the Enclave to be a playable faction, but in Fallout 3 it would make sense because they were completely defeated on the West Coast because of their extremism, so on the East Coast the remaining members could be more open to people outside their faction, recruiting not only the player but other people from the Wasteland as well. This is the reason for so much fight between Alton and President John Henry Eden. But in the game, if the password is given, the player is killed, making the only option is to oppose the Enclave, and at the time this was overlooked because it was a new game in a new location, so Bethesda could make the story with the final they wanted. But in the future, with the launch of the new games, we would know, at least I think we would know the real reason for not having a choice, and in my opinion it is favoritism. I don't know why, but Bethesda has a gigantic favoritism with the Brotherhood of Steel, ending the story of the first games to give more power to the Brotherhood and doing things that they wouldn't do before, just for the Brotherhood to come out on top and be the main protagonists of all the games so far, and even the new TV series. In other words, from this moment in the history of the game, Fallout 3 becomes what I usually call the beating Enclave simulator. It seems that the Enclave forgets everything. Regardless of what happens, the Enclave will lose. Soldiers forget their training, equipment no longer works, any new technological possibilities disappear, and the Enclave simply becomes a punching bag. All that fierce fighting on the west coast is forgotten by Bethesda, and the Enclave is simply humiliated by the Brotherhood of Steel, who would humiliate everything that dared to come in their way in the future, and in this way Bethesda humiliatingly threw the faction with the greatest visual appeal into the trash of the entire Fallout saga. At least in the final attack on the Project Purity, the Enclave could have an anti-tank sniper, perhaps even a new energy cannon that would disable the Liberty Prime or could shoot at the leg joints, making the robot no longer walk, making the advance of the Brotherhood much more difficult and delivering the feeling of once again a difficult battle against the most notorious villains, just as it was on the West Coast. But no, the Enclave was just humiliated. And in Bethesda writing, even if Liberty Prime was disabled, I think that the company, the special company of the Brotherhood of Steel, would humiliate the Enclave soldiers as well, just as Liberty Prime did. So I think this is a narrative problem and not a problem like, let's say, gameplay, because in Bethesda's mind, I think that they just would want to humiliate Enclave in any possible way to make the Brotherhood look very good. But I don't kind of like that. I prefer the sensation of difficult battle. But okay, we will not have that in Fallout 3 and not in the other games as well. And after the end of the game, with the destruction of Raven Rock and the resumption of the Project Purity, we would receive a Broken Steel DLC, where miraculously, I don't know how to speak that word, but it was a miracle that the player or Sarah would survive the giant radiation from the Project Purity and would have to fight the villains once again. Only this time the Enclave would show some fighting by luring the Liberty Prime into a trap and destroying the robot with a powerful attack. And then the player thinks, yes, we will have resistance from the Enclave, but no, the DLC is just a few more hours of the Enclave being humiliated again, but with a new base and an even stronger technology than in the base game, such as a power armor, Hellfire, which was the strongest personal armor in the world and probably still is in the most modern games of the saga, but it didn't do any good as they were beaten in the same way. After the events of Fallout 3, the Enclave would only appear in Fallout 76 and not as a main faction in the period in which the game takes place, but rather before. And it was a complete and senseless chaos, entrenched in a bunker and with the possibility of dominating the surface and having a strong faction. The story of the Enclave in Fallout 76 takes a strange and chaotic path. A new extremist leader, once again, named Eckhart, decided to put everyone who did not agree with his vision of continuing to bomb China. And well, this could be and could not be a narrative error, because in my knowledge of the Fallout universe, it says that China was more affected by the bombs than the United States was. So if the United States was in a precarious situation, China was even worse. At least I think I read this on some page or some wiki or something like that. But this could be a narrative error or not. I am not sure, but if China was that destroyed, it wouldn't make sense to bomb it more, risking to destroy Appalachia and your faction, and that was what happened. So Eckhart put the people that didn't agree with his vision in a room and he killed everyone, making the already limited manpower more limited. And to launch the bombs, the situation on the surface, for some reason, had to be a completely chaos, and this the Enclave tried to do, creating and releasing all kinds of mutant aberrations on the surface, including the bat dragons that were created by the Enclave. And they would be so powerful that the Enclave would lose control over them, and yet, with all the chaos, they would not be able to launch the missiles and would perish once again in an internal struggle without achieving anything. So to finish the video, my vision of why the Enclave was destroyed, it was Bethesda. I don't know if the times has changed and the Enclave is too much of a polemic faction that could not take place on the games as a maybe playable faction or a faction to side with or to not destroy, but in Bethesda's eyes, they just destroyed the Enclave uncountable times, and if it appear again on a future game, maybe on Chicago, probably the Enclave would be completely destroyed by the Midwest Brotherhood of Steel or another expedition of the already weak West Brotherhood, if Bethesda knows that the Brotherhood from the West is not what it used to be. So my vision is, the first game that the Enclave appeared, they were implacable. They were like kind of unstoppable, is what I'm trying to say. What they wanted, they managed to get, they conquered, but with a lot of fight and a lot of effort, the Enclave was destroyed with very resistance and difficulty. This is a good narrative story of a game, in my opinion. It's like to think, spoilers from Red Dead Redemption 2, that you discover that Micah is a traitor very before in the game. You destroy Micah and Arthur and his gang do everything right and everything goes well for the gang. It would be a final, could be good, yeah, could, but in my opinion, the way that Red Dead Redemption 2 make its way, let's say like that, in the history of very difficulty and only finding that Micah is the traitor on the very end practically makes it very good, and the gang suffer, everyone suffers, people dies. So I think that sensation of difficulty, it's very good for a history to happen, and the satisfaction that we have as John of killing Micah is very large, more large and good, because it was difficult on the entire story. What I'm trying to say is, when it happens, the transition of the first developer to Bethesda, Enclave cease to be a difficult effort to defeat faction. So in Fallout 3 they were humiliated, in the DLC they were humiliated, in Fallout 76 it was a completely chaos, and in the end they destroyed themselves and they all died being humiliated. So the Enclave, the very, in my opinion, notorious villains with a lot of appeal to the fans, have been destroyed by Bethesda by being a completely, even childish faction that it is cartoonically villains and bad just for the sake of it, and not putting any effort at all for the good guys, the Brotherhood of Steel, to always destroy them and come at the top of their game, every game. I think is that what I say, if it is possible to understand my English. So that's it for today, guys. Obviously English is not my very language, so I'm sorry if you couldn't understand a lot of things that I say. I'm training and I'm trying to speak English better, alright? So I hope you could understand, and I expect and want you to comment on the comment section. What do you think about this video, and what is your opinion on the topic? Do you think that the Enclave should be destroyed and humiliated, or do you think I am wrong on my arguments, or did you agree that the Enclave lose its appeal and its fan base in the modern games because of Bethesda? And that's it, guys. I would kindly ask for, if it is possible, to you to subscribe to the channel and leave the like, and principally to comment your opinion on the comment sections. And that's it. Sorry if you couldn't understand my English, and until the next video, bye.